I don't actually play too many AAA games anymore. I mean, there's always exceptions. I play a lot of Nintendo stuff, and occasionally a bigger Sony tile will spill through the cracks, but my bread and butter, my true favorites, are the smaller games that are actually able to try something new. So when I sat down to play Ghost of Tsushima, I had the thought, oh wow, this is my first ever Assassin's Creed-like. This means that when I think about Ghost, my points of reference are much more limited than others. I've played both of the Insomniac Spider-Man games, but they're quite different types of open worlds, and I've played Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. What this boils down to is, while I played through Ghost, I just thought about Breath of the Wild a lot. And I know so many people don't like comparisons with Breath of the Wild, so the few I do have I'll be saving for the very end. But first, I want to focus on the game that is Ghost of Tsushima. Ghost was developed by Sony's Sucker Punch and released in July of 2020. Only a few months after Sony's other big 2020 title, The Last of Us Part 2. Then after the release of the PS5, Sony released DLC and a graphical/performance upgrade in August of 2021, which is when I finally got around to playing it. And I definitely had a time. Ghost of Tsushima is about Jin Sakai. Jin starts the game as a rigid samurai and sworn protector of the island of Tsushima, the product of his uncle, the ruler of Tsushima, Lord Shimura. Over the course of the game, he transitions from being the honorable samurai to the stealthy and unhonorable ninja, the titular Ghost of Tsushima. This transition begins during a gnarly battle between the Lord Samurais of Tsushima and the Mongol invaders. Amidst this battle, Jin sees basically everyone die before he himself is cut down, with his uncle being taken prisoner. After the battle, some magical wind seems to breathe life back into Jin, and he swears to avenge his fallen brethren and rescue his uncle, no matter the cost. From here, Jin travels across Tsushima, defeating Mongols as he goes, and meets a whole bunch of friends to help his journey. They have fun adventures, many twists and turns occur, we learn that his friends are not perfect, and eventually I realize the story is not the reason I continued to play Ghost of Tsushima. This is a byproduct of two things. One, I happen to like watching movies and reading books, both of which, in general, have better writing than AAA video games. Two, I mainly play indie games, where narratives are usually much more personal and oftentimes better written. So as I sat through the cutscenes in Ghost, I found myself about as entertained as when I watch, say, the next Marvel movie. It's not bad writing per se, but it's also not moving me. The performances are great, and the graphical quality for each character model is out of this world, but the actual narrative stakes were fairly boilerplate. Ghost of Tsushima is a lot of recycling, not much innovation. If at any point you think the story is heading towards a certain point, you are absolutely correct. Same goes for the individual character arcs. They too fell into recycled archetypes, and I could not get myself to care about them. At best, I understood what the writing team was doing, at worst, I was rolling my eyes. In fact, multiple characters throughout the story do the "we're not so different you and I" trope, and it's actually pretty comical. So the narrative isn't why I kept playing the game, but I did wind up putting 63 hours into it. This is mostly due to two things the game did impeccably well. Oh my god, this game looks amazing, and oh wow, they really made a good gameplay loop, didn't they? First, let's dive into aesthetics. Because it didn't really do much for me, first I'll mention the soundtrack. It was all really well done, it set the tone perfectly. The score was a collaboration between Ilan Eshkeri and Shigeru Umebayashi, and it does the job well. What it didn't do was stick with me after I stopped playing. But video game soundtracks don't always need to do that, oftentimes it's just enough to set the mood right, and every piece nails that aspect. What made me fall head over heels was how good the game looked visually. From a technical standpoint, these graphics are good. The faces, especially the more detailed models during cutscenes, are amazing. It is fantastic how the animators and modelers were able to make the performances from the actors shine through the layer of CG plastic. The character models as a whole all look great from afar too. What really made the game shine though was the environments. Sunsets, sunrises, light shimmering through leaves, bouncing off calm lakes or rushing rivers, it's absolutely amazing. The open world portion of the game opens with Jin riding his horse through a field of white flowers and my jaw literally dropped. The first time I climbed a shrine and looked out over the southern portion of Tsushima, I couldn't believe that games could look this good. And this first third of the game wasn't even my favorite. The second portion has Jin traveling through yellow-washed swamps, bamboo forests, and my personal favorite, autumnal hills washed in greens and oranges and reds and yellows. The colors all pop to an unrealistic standard, but it makes for incredibly good scenery. The DLC of Iki Island has its own share of color. Almost every area is covered in bright greens and multicolored flowers. The final area, the snow-covered landscape of North Tsushima, is a harsh contrast to the reds and golds from the second area, but as the sun glimmers off the always fresh snow, it was incredibly beautiful the whole way. And aside from my own camera work, these set pieces are best shown during the standoffs. Calling to a group of enemies instigates the classic samurai movie battle. Jin walks slowly towards his enemy, the camera is set at a low angle, giving a good view of our combatants against the always beautiful backdrop. Jin waits, his hand resting on the hilt of his father's blade, waiting for the precise moment to counter. Maybe the Mongol cheers once, twice, baiting Jin to falter, but he remains stoic. Finally, the Mongol draws his blade and begins his swing. Mid-arc, Jin finally unsheaths, slicing down his opponent in a single strike. 2 more Mongols attack, 2 more Mongols fall. The final Mongols might flee, they might fight, but they are no match for Jin Sakai. Of course, this is the optimal solution, but regardless of execution, it never gets old, because the combat in Ghost of Tsushima is absolutely top tier. These encounters are especially fun, as you are required to hold down a button, only releasing at the precise moment to strike. Then you have to time your follow-ups perfectly as your next enemies come at you. Oftentimes, entire encounters can be finished with just this one opening parry. But even if there's still guys left, or you opted to fight the group without the standoff mechanic, the main combat feels just as good. Jin, after leveling up a bit, has 4 different stances. Each of these stances are good against different types of enemies, and toggling between stances mid-combat allows every enemy to be taken down optimally. Actual combat features sword slashes, parries, blocks, and sometimes kicks. Jin is usually focused on one opponent, and when another attacks from behind, he'll flip around, block, and focus on them instead. Or he'll get stabbed in the back. That part is up to the player. Either way, the combat has a flow to it that was incredibly fun to master. If there are a lot of enemies though, it might wind up being too much to face off against all of them. Luckily, over the course of the game, Jin learns the benefits of using stealth. Unfortunately, I think Jin's transformation into a ninja takes too long. I was most of the way through the first area before the really cool mechanics started being introduced. Going in knowing that Jin would eventually become the ghost, I was immediately ready to start slaughtering from the shadows. The game, however, has to meander through Jin foregoing his samurai ways, and this meandering occurs both in the gameplay and the narrative. Finally, after what the game thought was a moving cutscene, I finally unlocked stealth kills, and the rest followed pretty quickly. This is partly my fault. I should have mainlined the golden path a bit sooner, and I'd have the fun stealth stuff quicker. But even then, there's a lot of game after the first area, so as an overall package it wasn't so bad. Becoming a cool ninja certainly has its perks though. Jin first only does stealth kills, then gets a grappling hook, knife throws, smoke bombs, bows and arrows, and the rarely used poison darts. I didn't like them. But these make the stealth encounters absolutely wonderful. Not to mention how each of these can be upgraded to be even deadlier. It was so fun sneaking into an area. I'd often hide in the tall grass or grapple atop a building. I'd take out baddies first with my bow, then the knife. One of my favorite upgrades allows Jin to stealth kill multiple enemies at once. Soon half the enemy camp would already be wiped out. Then after engaging in combat, throwing down a smoke bomb allows for an extra stealth kill in plain view, or I could throw a few knives at my enemies, staggering them before I rush in with the sword. Or if I'm not feeling combat, I could smoke bomb and grapple back into stealth. This gameplay loop of finding enemies, killing them in whichever way is best applicable for the situation, rinse and repeat, was by far the best part of Ghost of Tsushima. But to get all this cool combat, you need to, well, do the combat. Every battle rewards some experience, and usually enemies will drop items or have them around their camp. Experience makes Jin stronger, as well as increases reputation around the island. The items are used to upgrade his weapons and armor. New weapons and armor can be purchased from various vendors or rewarded by doing side quests for various peasants. Additionally, by spying on and killing the Mongol bosses that are in each camp, you slowly unlock the aforementioned battle styles. In the end though, most of these systems are only there to refine the combat. While I bet a tight linear adventure using just Ghosts combat would be a real good time, maybe a better one, the actual game disperses these sections throughout the open world that is the island of Tsushima. Equipped with his horse and magical wind, Jin traverses his now worn-torn homeland. The horse is pretty darn good too. You can name it, I think I named mine Sora, and Sora can do everything you'd think a horse could do. It runs, avoids trees fairly well, can jump short distances, and is indestructible. I fell off way too many cliffs with this guy, and his legs just never got hurt. What a guy. He's also always around. By whistling, Jin can call the horse to him anywhere, anytime. Which is good because I found myself constantly disembarking to fight some guys or to solve a puzzle, only to have lost sight of Sora. But it's easy enough to hop right back on and continue riding. Riding to where, you might ask? Oh, to where the magical and never explained wind is guiding you, of course. Across the map there are a few different icons, towns Jin has visited, quests he's heard about, as well as the various side activities are all displayed. Selecting one of these places directs the wind to blow there, giving a really clever diegetic solution to guiding Jin to his destination. As Jin travels, a certain radius around him is uncovered on the map. This radius can be expanded by an early armor, the Traveler's Attire, which means people like me had it equipped for 100% of the game. Nevertheless, if Jin gets close enough to something, it'll appear on the map as a question mark and a small jingle will play. Following the guiding wind to it gives Jin one of a few benefits. Fox dens are scattered around. A cute little fox will guide Jin to a shrine, which slowly levels up the amount of charms he can equip. Hot springs dot the world, and taking a bath increases Jin's health a tiny bit. Haiku spots are placed in particularly beautiful areas, and after crafting a poem and seeing the game at its peak pretty, Jin gets a new headband. Bamboo strikes are placed for Jin to practice swinging his sword by slashing through bamboo, which increases Jin's resolve, or his ability to heal. There are also lighthouses around the island that Jin can light that gives regular experience, except now the lighthouses are lit, I guess. The most influential side things are the Shinto shrines. These wind up being really neat platforming puzzles where you have to run, jump, climb, and grapple over various obstacles to get to the top of the shrine. Once there, yet another fun cutscene plays. As Jin prays, time quickly flows forward and we're treated to a helicopter shot of the surrounding scenery. Jin is then rewarded with a charm to improve an aspect of him. While these are pretty fun puzzles, it is annoying how not fun the climbing is. You just hold in a direction and Jin jumps to the next marked place in that direction. It's not challenging, it just takes a while. Back to the map, the last things marked are quests, towns, and camps. Towns are usually covered in Mongols and Jin can either sneak or fight his way through. After defeating them, the town gets populated by merchants and other peasants. Camps come in either Mongol flavoring or peasant flavoring. Peasant camps have a few merchants where the Mongol camps are, you guessed it, more combat. And side quests, aside from being bookended by middling storylines, wind up also just being more combat experiences. And that is Ghost of Tsushima. Ride or run through the lands, maybe look to the horizon for a thing, but really just select a thing on the map, follow the wind, and do any fun side things in between. It's a really tight gameplay loop that is only hampered by a couple of things. Sometimes, moving around the world sucks, and there is just too much. This is the Breath of the Wild comparison I warned about at the beginning. I cannot tell you how many times I stood at the top of a cliff, wanted to be at the bottom of a cliff, and wished to God I could just jump off and glide down. It would have made moving across hills and valleys so much more gratifying. Instead, Jin has to find the clearly marked handholds to climb up or down, or he has to walk around the entire cliff. It was so frustrating trying to find the climbable spot, getting off Sora, climbing up, then calling Sora at the top to keep riding. Or instead of getting Sora, just running, because it might take longer for Sora to run to you. But then the destination wound up being further than you thought, and now it's taking even longer because you're walking instead of riding. Oh, but this cliff doesn't look so high. Maybe jumping off will be... Nope. Jin's dead. Jumped to his death. Why didn't you want to spend 5 minutes climbing down a dumb wall or walking around, because now your main protagonist is splattered against the ground? And it doesn't help that the game is just too long. There is so much stuff to do. I didn't even mention the 6 other collectibles that are placed in various places only to fill up the space. I wound up having a good time, but towards the end, after finishing my 1000th enemy camp, after slaying my 1000th Mongol, I wanted the game to be over. If I could, I would have taken a knife to the overworld and cut out all of this. I'd leave in a quarter of the starting area and half of the other two, shooting for around 10 hours for the first, with the next couple being a little less than that. Then Sucker Punch would have had a truly amazing game on their hands. But as it is, they really needed an editor to come in and make big cuts. And they must have learned this lesson at least a little bit, because the Iki Island DLC was paced perfectly. There was just enough stuff to do that none of it outstayed its welcome, but I still left feeling satisfied. If the game was 3 Iki Islands in length, I'd have been much happier with it. But as it stands, I had a pretty good time with Ghost of Tsushima. I spent a lot of time in Jin's shoes. So much of that time was great, but it took too long to get there, and when it finally did get there, the game refused to end. And without a solid narrative keeping me truly invested, the once great gameplay loop wore out its welcome. Overall, I give Ghost of Tsushima this screenshot from the game that I took because, again, this game is beautiful. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you liked my near 3,000 words on a game I thought was pretty good, give the video a rating, or tell me in the comments why I have bad taste and Breath of the Wild is overrated. Please don't actually do that. I try to post every other week, so sub to watch out for that. I also have social media, links in the doobly-doo, all are at Mario8th. I hope you enjoyed, see you next time.